After weeks of a vicious bombing campaign against the city of Gaza, Israeli forces have invaded the small territory, hoping to seek retribution for the Israeli lives lost in the October 7th attack that claimed the lives of 1,200 Israeli citizens. Israel hopes to decapitate the leadership of Hamas and release an estimated 200 Israeli hostages being held within the Gaza Strip. In the meantime, international support is plummeting for Israel as footage of the bombing campaign and its aftermath spread across the Western world. The enormous international sympathy for the state of Israel is quickly fading as thousands of innocent Palestinians who live within the city have been caught up in the crossfire and killed. So, without further ado, hit the like and subscribe button and let's quickly go through the events of the weekend. The bombing campaign over the last several weeks had both its successes and its failures, and it is worth mentioning before we discuss the invasion. Like my reports on the Ukraine war, I will try to speak of the situation objectively and just cover the raw information, so I apologize for inevitably angering some viewers. A closer analysis of footage released by the IDF shows explosions inside the city of Gaza erupting from underneath the ground. What you are seeing here appears to be successful penetrating hits on the underground tunnel system used by the Hamas militant group to hide their troops and store rockets and ammunition. For these strikes in particular, Israel appears to be hitting their targets. However, looking at the same strikes, you will notice that these underground blasts are rising up in the streets amid densely populated residential apartment buildings. The collateral damage of these strikes is immense. Most governments around the world in the aftermath of the October 7th attacks made statements expressing that the fighting was carried out by Hamas, a terrorist organization that is in essence holding the Palestinian population of Gaza hostage. So while there are almost no supporters for Hamas in the Western world, there is a great deal of sympathy for the average Gazan, and strikes like this that produce the scenes of emergency workers digging children out of rubble greatly harm the Israeli cause. I could spend more time on this, but there is much reporting on these events already. Over the weekend, Israel finally decided to breach the borders of Gaza with ground troops, and they did so in three places. First, along the coastline. Israel captured the small settlement of As Saifa and created a salient down to the beach resorts and appears to be targeting Al Atatra, which is a community of landowners and strawberry farmers whom are native to the land and are not Palestinian refugees. Israel has long believed the neighborhood to be a political stronghold of Hamas, and it was one of the primary targets of the IDF in 2008 and 2009 during that Gaza war. The second incursion began at Checkpoint Ezra, a border crossing also on the northern border of the Gaza territory. IDF troops have taken over much of the agricultural fields and now lay siege to Beit Hanun, a town with a population of over 50,000. The third and most consequential incursion by the IDF hints us towards Israel's intended plan with this invasion. Video shows a mass number of IDF Merkava tanks, along with armored personnel carriers and armored bulldozers, breaching the fence in the south close to the Israeli Nagal Oz settlement, the site of an IDF base that was overrun by Hamas in the opening hours of the October 7th attack, and where many Israeli troops were slaughtered. This armored spearhead rapidly drove a wedge through the Gaza Strip and severed the main arterial road that connects the city of Gaza to the south. If Hamas was hoping to keep the territorial integrity of Gaza in order to assist in the defense, then they have already lost in that effort. This section of the strip is far less densely populated and does not pose the same significant threat to IDF troops as a dense inner city street fight. It appears the IDF plans to carve up the Gaza Strip into different sections and defeat each pocket of resistance in detail. For now, I expect the IDF will continue to push west towards the sea and will likely look to capture everything south up to the creek that will separate them from the Nuseirat camp. At this point, the city of Gaza will be blockaded within a blockade. Admittedly, this is something Hamas is used to, but they will be cut off from likely half of their forces and well over half of their population, which is south of the creek. Depending on where most of their troops and weapons are located, Israel can then choose to strike north, which is more likely due to the evacuation demands, or the south, which would only happen in the case that Hamas was able to move most of their forces and weapons caches out of Gaza over the last 2 weeks. It is important to note that many people, perhaps as many as half of the population of the northern Gaza Strip, have evacuated to the southern stretch of the territory. But Gaza itself is a densely populated city, and there is not adequate space in the south, which has far more territory and far fewer structures to hold all of its inhabitants. Hundreds of thousands of civilians still remain in the northern territories and not only are subject to the bombings by the Israeli Air Force, but will also have to avoid gunfire between the IDF and Hamas. The international community is rapidly turning against the Israelis. In Turkey, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, a nation and a leader historically somewhat friendly to Israel, held a massive rally in support of Palestine and made a speech in which he called the Israelis war criminals and he alluded to making war on them. While this is likely a political move to shore up national support for himself, it does speak to the attitude of the Turkish people who turned out to the protest in droves. In the Russian Muslim majority province of Dagestan, an angry mob started a riot and stormed the Makhachkala airport, searching for Jewish passengers that just arrived on a flight from Tel Aviv, Israel. The small airport was engulfed in violence, and as many as 20 people were injured, with 2 critical. Russian police put down the riot and arrested 60 members of the mob. In the U.S., the current administration has reported an alarming increase in anti Semitic incidents on university campuses across the country. This appears to be backed by the data from a recent poll that shows while a majority of Americans support Israel in the Middle East, 73% of Americans in the 18 to 34 age group do not support the Israeli response to the Hamas attack. The same age group has the greatest capacity for violence as has been repeatedly shown throughout history. What is interesting about the U.S. situation is the current Democratic administration has joined alongside the Republicans and thrown their full support towards Israel despite the Democratic voter base being progressively more pro-Palestinian through the years and now holds this as a majority view. While obviously pro-Palestinian liberals will not vote Republican anytime soon, this could result in reduced voter turnout for the Democrats in the next election cycle if the situation is not quickly resolved. This greatly complicates the situation for the current ruling administration in the U.S. I think my opinions on these types of things are clear, but just let me reiterate once more. I believe violence and atrocities are committed by the individual, and assigning guilt to all members of an ethnic or religious group based on the crimes of a few is categorically wrong and is the same misguided thinking that has resulted in all of the most tragic events in world history. This goes for both, in this case, Arabs and Jews. It is the hope of myself, and I believe many of the viewers on this channel, that the violence is put to an end as soon as possible and peace is restored. Yet, unfortunately, I find this to be extremely unlikely. There is huge potential for spillover in this conflict. Rhetoric from Arabs, Jews, and Christians, specifically in America, concerning a, quote, holy war, could force governments into action against Israel, which otherwise would prefer not to. In World War I, the assassinations of Austrian Duke Franz Ferdinand caused a chain reaction which saw the Austrian Empire declare war on Serbia, which then forced the Russian Empire to declare war on Austria in order to save their Serbian allies. Germany then declared war on Russia to save their Austrian allies, and France then declared war on Germany because they were allies with Russia. This death spiral would lead to a conflict that claimed 20 million lives and maimed 21 million more. If the situation in the Middle East is not handled with care, a similar outcome is possible. Hezbollah, a Shia militant army based in Lebanon, could be under political pressure to attack Israel on behalf of the Palestinians. Israel will then seek to destroy Hezbollah as well, which is funded by Iran. Iran cannot afford to allow Hezbollah to be destroyed, as it is Iran's only influence in the Mediterranean. So Iran will be then forced to join the war. The U.S. would gladly declare war on Iran on Israel's behalf, as they are already enemies. If Iran is destroyed, then more U.S. military resources could be focused on traditional U.S. superpower foes. So, to avoid this, Russia and China will have to make a choice on joining the war to balance the odds. Similar to the U.S. decision to join the war, to join World War I, despite the lack of alliance obligations. Of course, this is not the most likely scenario. It is simply a possible one. No global conflict was ever started intentionally. Each and every one was an uncontrollable spiral into oblivion. Let me know in the comments what you think are the possible paths to achieving a ceasefire and avoiding this scenario. Thanks again for joining, and until next time.